I'm Robert Helms, usually called Bob. Um, I was born in 1957. I'll be 68 in September. I was born on Long Island. I live in Philadelphia, and I've been living in Philadelphia for most of the last 35 years. I was born Eastern Long Island. I grew up in a town called Center Reach. Uh, it was when I first got there, I was about five, and it was all woods. So I was growing up in woods, but as I grew, the woods were being destroyed by bulldozers, turned into roads and housing developments and shopping malls. So I was very, interested in the woods, and I chopped down trees and I made forts in the trees, and it was just this kind of non-political experience. We hated when the woods were turned down, but there was no political thinking. Um, my mother and father were both totally working class. Um, my mother is where I get all of my creative intelligence and inquisitive intelligence. My father was a gifted mechanic, but had none of the creative intelligence. It's just like I saw him restore and fix machines and cars that I can hardly believe how totally the thing it turns from a rusty old piece of junk to a beautiful, shiny, perfectly running museum piece. I don't understand, but it was two totally different people. My mother would read all day when I was in school, and when I came home from school, along with food, she would tell me everything about what she read. And so sometimes it was like The History of Civilization by Will and Ariel Durant, or something like this. And it was all different kinds of things. But she was not, she was actually a high school dropout, as was my father. So I had a lot of adventures as a kid, and there was no political life. My mother was a fan of the Kennedys. I remember the day John Kennedy was killed. I was about five, and this was this massive tragedy for my mother. She was like screaming and crying, and when Robert Kennedy was killed, she was planning to attend one of his rallies on Long Island, and then he was killed, so she never did. But it was a totally white uh, place. This is white suburbs. Okay, I remember the day Martin Luther King was killed, and the way I found, and this is the first time I ever learned his name. Okay, I was about 10. I first learned his name by the kid next door whose family was tending toward racism. He says to me, he's like 11, I'm 10. And he says, "Did you hear? They killed Martin Luther Kuhn." So it was just this generalized background racism. It was sort of normalized. Okay. And I didn't know I didn't personally know as a friend or coworker any African Americans until I had already moved to Philadelphia, and I was in my late 20s or 30s, early 30s. So it's Long Island, it's this little bubble. I have good experiences and bad experiences, memories from there. Um, the major experience of my teenage years was being a very self-destructive alcoholic Alcoholism has laid a big footprint in my life. Um, I drank from when I was 12 to when I was 21, very, very heavily. And then I stayed sober for 25 years. And then I had a relapse for 6 years. And that relapse ended 14 years ago. So more than half of my adult life has been knowing the difference between sobriety and drunkenness and being sober. Okay. So I I'll just add as an aside, people who want to know what I think about alcohol seldom want to hear it a second time because I'm very blunt and uh, what I say about it is that it never benefits anyone. It's never anyone's friend in any way. And the only people who benefit from it, from the existence of alcohol, are people who sell alcohol. And they benefit by putting money in their pocket. And that's it. It damages you a little tiny bit if you're lucky or careful. It damages you a lot or kills you if you're not lucky or careful. Everything starts to get much more interesting when I move to Philadelphia. When I get sober, okay, I get sober age. I get sober and move to Philadelphia, and I get to Philadelphia when I'm 25. And I was involved with a love partner at the time who was from here. That's why I came to Philly instead of some other place. Oh, all through the years, when I'm young, I'm working in factories. I'm drilling holes and cutting boards and building furniture and making picture frames, all these different things. But I was basically a factory worker. And then in Philadelphia, I I just, because my partner was, she had a PhD and I just had a high school equivalency. Uh, she told me to go to college, so I did. And I went to Temple University and I majored because my mind was this blank slate. I didn't have any teenage intellectual life. I All that was a drunken mess. Okay. Uh, so I had to start from nothing. So I decided I'm going to do something that I enjoy and which is interesting and not pick something that is about getting a job to earn money right away with the thing that I learned. So I was a classical studies major. I studied Greek and Latin, and that gets me onto another path, which led to I studied 1 year in Rome in the Temple's campus in Rome, in Italy. And I studied another uh, year in Vishakhapatnam, India, which is, I was on basically a loaner, a consortium agreement with University of Wisconsin. And the way I did this was I was so enchanted by life in Europe and going, traveling, getting out of the United States, getting away from, put it this way, when you go from macaroni and cheese and Salisbury steaks in the United States, you discover that there's something called food that you didn't know about before. It's like, forget it. It was like I was like going to another planet. So I didn't want to have another dull year in the United States. Um, so I signed up for a year in India, and I had to argue that I simply must study Sanskrit. I passionately argued, which didn't make a lot of sense, but I went and I studied some Sanskrit, didn't get very good at it. And I got pretty decent in Greek. Uh, but anyway, I went to India and that's when I start to get more atheist and more political because the poverty in India was, I don't know what it's like now. It's probably about the same or moved around a little bit, but I doubt that it's much better. Uh, when you see uh, so-called untouchables off on the edge, and people people working with coolie hats in the hot sun in India, just moving rocks and sticks around, and the poverty was so intense that I was pretty shocked. Uh, and another thing that I did in India was and in the Hindu temples when I was in India, you would go into the temple and up on the board, it was like a menu going into a fast food restaurant. Seeing the menu up on the wall, it would say a prayer for this, like my son is going to take an exam in school. The prayer is so many rupees. So this was not essentially, not profoundly different from Catholicism, which was my background religion, but it's made me stop being as fascinated with the mythology and the exotic beauty of the religious culture, and I started to think more about that's retail business or something like that. I became more atheist, and so uh, another thing very important that I did in India was I had to have a big project that was just mine, uh, the project for the year for me, and I decided to make a study of the lifestyle and the human condition of lepers because there were leprosy colonies scattered around. This is in Andhra Pradesh, and it's the language used there is Telugu. So I got to be friends with a guy. He was a Brahmin before he was a leper, but then he explained to me that everybody who has leprosy is a leper, and there's no caste. You lose your caste. So so this was very fascinating work, and I still look back on it. I wish I had taken it further. I wish a lot of things, but that was a really interesting experience. So I come home from India, and uh, I wind up in West Philadelphia. Okay. I had already been in Philadelphia, but in the far northeast, which is it's semi-suburban. It's all white, pretty much all white. Um, and I didn't have any. There was no political experience there. So anyway, I come to West Philadelphia, and I have read. Uh, there's two things happening. One is I discovered the Wooden Shoe Bookstore, which is the anarchist bookstore, which had already existed since the 70s. And I was always finding new bookstores and going through all the secondhand bookstores. And I go into I go into the Wooden Shoe and I buy uh, The Fateful Triangle by Noam Chomsky. Okay, so I had known about Noam Chomsky very well from the linguistics part, been studying languages in school, but I had heard that he had weird politics, supposedly. So I read this book, and I was pretty shocked because Chomsky was writing about the 1982 invasion of Lebanon by Israel. Okay, I had followed that same thing in the mainstream news when it was happening every day on TV and in the newspapers. I thought I was an expert on that story, but when you read the Chomsky, it turns out I was just this person who was spoon-fed the Western mainstream media in favor, in bias toward Israel. And I was sort of treated, I had been treated like a child by the media. And I was, 32 or something. So I thought that this was pretty shocking, and I had to figure it out, sort it out, figure it, what, see what it meant. So I kept getting more and more Chomsky and reading, and then that segued into learning about the Spanish Civil War, and I picked up a book about the biography of Voltairine de Cleyre by Paul Average. Now, that made the biggest impression on me, bigger than any book that I've ever touched, um, because the story mainly happens of Voltairine de Cleyre happens in Philadelphia, and I was in Philadelphia, and while this is also happening, I'm working. I started working in a group home, taking care of mentally disabled, mentally retarded, as it was then called. Now it's developmentally disabled and intellectually disabled people. Um, but I took care of these clients, these handicapped clients in group homes, and I started a union campaign in the group homes. To make a long story short, I was hired by the union to be a staff organizer. And I was with that union, that was the hospital workers, uh, with that union, and later with IWW, I was organizing workers and actively doing union stuff for like 25 years or so. Okay, 20 years in the IWW, that's for sure. Um, and the transformation into like being hooked on anarchism was being worried about being cautious of the media. And I start to lean toward what I believe is the most important thing of all, critical thinking. You're not believing, you have to learn it all very thoroughly and prove it and know that it's based on facts, and that you should do that with any cause, with any support you give, before you teach it to another person. Before you preach it or teach it, you should know it, and it should be true. um, so I get I get hooked on anarchist history because I like Voltairine de Cleyre. She lived here, and Paul Average was naming the places where things were happening. So I'm going to the place. Like I read it in the morning, and I get in the car, drive to that spot, exactly the spot, see if the building is still there, all this stuff. And I start getting into archival research in a very, you know, total way, as much as I could do with it. All my resources, all my time, historical research, and buying books and taking trips to faraway places to go to the archive. And another thing I did was I started visiting the graves of anarchists. Uh, all the dead anarchists that I could find the grave of, I did. And I found a lot of them in the United States and in France, but a few in other places too that I'd go to, you know, pull out the weeds or figure it out. Sometimes I'd go and find that there was no grave. It had been obliterated, or it had been moved to another place because the graveyard was closed and the bodies moved, all sorts of things. And I discovered something very important. If you do research on a person, but you don't worry about what happened to their dead body, you might miss something extremely important. And that's happened to me several times. the grave tells you a long part of the story that you would never find, you cannot find in another place. So anyway, another thing I did was start hanging around with other anarchists from the Wooden Shoe originally, but we started discussion groups, weekly discussion groups, which were a lot of fun. And we did that in our living rooms in our houses for a while. And then we decided to start a venue, and there were collectivized buildings in the neighborhood. It's another story. Um, so we started the A space, the anarchist space. It was a storefront size thing, and it had a back office. And pretty soon after that, within the first couple of years, uh, people I know started books through bars, which is sending books to prisoners for free as an educational effort and to improve their human condition and to give them something to do. And it's very important for prisoners to have books. And this was all anarchists doing all that. I arranged for 4 years. I lived in the building in an apartment above the space, and I was the maintenance guy to keep the building repaired and all that. And I was also for the A space, I arranged events, speaker events. And I did I must have done a couple of hundred. The ones that stand out in my memory, I mean, there were a lot of professors and different kinds of activists that came. Uh, I gave lectures. Other people in the other comrades gave lectures on things that they knew. But a couple that stand out in my memory. One was I invited Ramona Africa from Move to speak. It was the first time she spoke to an anarchist audience after she got out of jail in '92. Okay. I'll get back to that later, and it's very important that I get back to that. Uh, Another one was Hakeem Bey, or no, also Peter Lamborn Wilson. I invite I a friend, one of the other comrades, invited him and had the date set, but they had to go out of town, so I had to pick up the task, and go and pick him up at the station, take him out to dinner, blah 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 blah. So that it happens, and there's more to that later. We had a gathering in '93 called the Mid Atlantic Anarchist Gathering. It was at the Friends Select School. It was the venue was pretty classy, and I and a couple of other people invited Lorenzo Camboa Irvin. Now that was important because it turned into Anarchist People of Color, it was called this group. And what we were doing, we were complaining to ourselves that, hey, we're all white. Why don't we get some color in this? Because this doesn't make any sense for us to all be white. And everything we're worried about happening in the world is people of color, this and that. So that was a very important thing. And after the gathering, we had a pirate operation going in Kinko's. Kinko's Copies was a soft target for free copies, to put it mildly. I know, like the statute of limitations is long since over. So I'll just tell you, I committed grand larceny about 2 or 3 times a week. My bumper used to scrape on the ground with the cases of paper that we made zines, sometimes for ourselves. We made pamphlets, we made little booklets, and we published Anarchism and the Black Revolution by Lorenzo Camboa Irvin under the imprint Monkey Wrench Press. So there were squats. Okay, there were many squats in this neighborhood. We had an office. I didn't live in a squat because I had thousands and thousands of books. I had this serious book collection, and I said, one raindrop on the books, and that's the end of the world. So forget that. So I would work on squats. I would open squats and move my friends in and help them. And I maintained an office for the publishing of anarchist literature in one of the squats, very close to where I live now. And so it was thriving. It was amazing for all through the 90s and into the everything collapses at 9/11 because everything was open all night. The post office, Kinko's, the diners, everything was open all night until 9/11, and then everything closed at night. And so it's sort of like shrank the civilization. Okay, the Hakim Bey thing brings me into this. I'm segueing into critical thinking. Okay, and I'm segueing a little into cultic problems. People forming cults without understanding that there's a cult thing going on. Okay, Hakim Bey was this guy who had a way of. He's dead now, so I'm talking about a dead person. He talked about temporary autonomous zones. Okay. Now I had heard about him, and I had just heard from friends in New York, anarchists in New York. Well, yeah, he like the first time I was talking about him with someone from New York, they were telling me, "Oh yeah, he goes for little boys." So I wasn't starting a fight. I was just okay. That's that's interesting. And there was this. Okay, it turns out that there was this historical thread in anarchism in the United States that had to do with pederasty mainly, which is teenage, teenage boys, uh, 12-year-olds, so 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and it goes back, 150 years. It goes back to uh, I'm forgetting names, but the historian, the person who turned it into a historical research project was Hubert Kennedy. Now that he's long dead too, but he was this California anarchist who believed that man boy love was a valid thing. And he took it back to there was a German anarchist, what the hell was his name? He grew up in Scotland. He turned into a Scottish anarchist, but he was born in Germany. Anyway, he there was this late 19th century background to the story. So everything as I'm finding out more about the Hakim Bey thing, I'm also finding out the old archival histories. So, make a long story short, I had a conversation with an anarchist from New York of whom you happen to be acquainted because you interviewed them. Um, I said, "What do you think of this? You're a parent. What do you think of this man boy love fucking bad thing?" And she says to me, "I don't want to talk to him." I was saying, "What would you say to him?" And she says, I wouldn't want to talk to him. I want to send him to the hospital." So it clicked in my mind that there's something wrong. Like it's not only does it not make sense, it's got a moral danger, say, and why would we? preach this stuff as an okay avenue of anarchism, because that's a self-destructive for the movement itself. And so, and the mainstream LGBT movement had already figured this out. Like the man boy love people will not be the marshals in the gay pride parade this year. Like they just so decided and hit the gavel on the table, and that was it. Okay. So in Europe, in France, I lived in France for a couple of years. They say, that's wild. That's like, we just grab him by the scruff of the neck and pitch him out of the meeting. Like, get out, fuck off. Like, and there's nothing to say. It's just a stupid idea. Uh, so anyhow, I was never. I put myself out, and it cost me. It made me lose a lot of friends, but I simply couldn't leave it alone because it bugged the shit out of me. And I decided, like, okay, nobody else in the world is ever going to raise this as an issue. It's never going to happen unless I do it. So here I am, and I'm doing it. So I would, at first, it was pranks. I would create new announcements for his public lectures, and just write in um, anarchism and pedophilia in the pirate colonial days, like something like this, and it would be this prank, and people would go ape shit. They would just go crazy, and um, but later it got more involved, like IWW. I would say, like when anybody would just do anything that had anything to do with him, I would say, I would like the organization I was in. I would say, what do you think it is? What's your position on man boy love? Could you answer, please? We need an answer. Like I would get formal, and then never leave it alone. One time in Europe, in Paris, there was this teeny little TV show, like a magazine show on a television station. It was Arte, and they had a little thing about Hakim Bey. So I got in touch with the little tiny group that made the thing, and I got in touch with the one of the vice presidents of Arte, which is this huge company. It's like three countries. It's like, talking about ABC News or something. And I gave them all the information. I said, what do you think of this? And they said, well, we appreciate your telling us, but we can't unbroadcast it. So it has to stay, it has to stop here. We can't do anything. But this was known to Hakim Bey, Peter Lamborn Wilson, and the people at his little publishing operation, which I won't name anybody there, but they know who they are. Um, they would go on the internet and delete stuff, take things out that had to do with what I was doing. And people who had worked there as volunteers would later tell me this. So I'm learning. Anyway, I don't want to go on about it, but in those days, all it did was really make enemies for me and cut back what I could get published, what I could do here and there and the other place, and make a lot of misunderstandings, because I was never accusing him of a crime. I was saying that this idea that adult child sex can be an avenue toward freedom in an anarchist sense, that is wrong, and it's got to go. It's got to die, and I'm killing it. I'm the fucking avenging angel. If you want to call me names, go ahead. Like, this is too fucking ridiculous for me. Sorry, I got a hiccuping condition. Can't do anything about it. So, why am I telling you that? Because critical thinking had not been used by the anarchists who embraced it and celebrated all these temporary autonomous zones. Temporary autonomous zones. The state and your family, they don't exist in the little bubble of the TAZ. It's just you and me. And if you and me is a pedophile inclined adult and a child, that's why they're establishing the TAZ. Okay. It's not to have a party and sell ecstasy and water to suckers. Okay. So, anyhow, this the other thing about anarchism is critical thinking, mutual aid, and kindness. Okay. And using the government as little as possible, creating a horizontal society rather than a government and a billionaire plutocracy is what anarchism is. But critical thinking is is the big kahuna for me. Um, and I want to mention that along the way, I've been working on books. Uh, I published. I caused to be published and edited and annotated the memoirs of Chaim Lieb Weinberg, which was a Jewish anarchist in Philadelphia. It's a respectable volume. They sell it at the Evo Archive in Manhattan. Um, uh, and I did this last year. This came out. This is the collected addresses of the radical addresses of Hugh Owen Pentecost. I did that with Frayed Edge Press, which is a friend of mine established a press to do special publications. And the one I just showed you, the Hugh Pentecost volume, it took 18 years of me pecking away at it. So it's like really uh, a big thrill when it actually I'm holding the volume and the book is in my hand. It's a major burden off my chest. Another thing I did that I forgot to mention was when I was first acquainted with anarchists in West Philly. A lot of them were living in squats, and they had these jobs, like these funny jobs, like uh, a messenger, a courier to de deliver, you know, courier packages in the offices in downtown, and some were exotic dancers in strip clubs, and some were human guinea pigs, volunteering as a healthy subject for drug trials, to see if the drug is safe and see if it works. Uh, Clinical trials is a way to make money as a paid volunteer. So I became acquainted with people who were doing that, and there was like this little subculture. Uh, so I was also getting acquainted with zines, like the zine Dishwasher and other ones. So I decided to make a zine about being a guinea pig, and I made Guinea Pig Zero. So this is when I started to think, okay, first of all, it was an anarchist project because I was pirating all the copies. I was making it physically myself by hand in a copy shop in the middle of the night when we had total control. We had a guy on the staff. He was the only worker. And this is in the 90s. Starts in 90, first published May 1st, 96. I had total control over what went in it and how it looked. There was nothing about that zine that I didn't control totally. So I could say anything I want, and I did. I evaluated the uh, the research units where we would do the drug trials. And I would write about disasters that happened, historical stuff, and the report cards. I made report cards on different clinical trials, and I gave some of them good marks and some of them bad marks, and some of them damning marks that precipitated lawsuits. So I got sued by a hospital corporation called Allegheny, and my getting sued by the pharmaceutical company and threatened with a lawsuit by SmithKline Beecham, and actually sued by the hospital chain. It got me in the national news, so that and it put me in like the into the history of guinea pigging as the go-to person for the media to ask about human guinea pigs. So I can't leave that out because uh, it was unbelievably successful as a zine. But in those days, at least, I don't know. See, now you get a certain number of likes on your website, your page, your little blog, or your videos on Facebook or something, and you can turn that into like a money making thing pretty automatically. But I didn't know how to. I wasn't a business. I didn't have a business mind. I'm very math defective. I'm stupid. I'm not bad at math. I'm stupid at math. And business, it doesn't happen with me. It's something that could have turned into a livelihood. And I was given book offers, and I finally did get an anthology published in 2002. Um, but it became this one of the central events of my life because, and I'll segue into the next part. 25 years after the zine was first published, I get contacted by a producer in Los Angeles who wants to do a TV show, like a documentary TV show about Guinea Pig Zero and my experience with it. And that particular project never went anywhere. It just got into like optioning me and keeping me aware of the ideas and how they're talking to people. And so finally, I'm talking and just catching up on the telephone about 6 years ago. How's things in Los Angeles? Oh, good. How's things in Philly? And I mentioned, oh yeah, and I know the Move people. They live down the block, and I know several of them, and I've helped them. I've I actually drove Ramona around as the driver in France once because I was available and I could drive, and I was a supporter. And I also went to visit um, twice. I went to visit Move 9 prisoners in jail, and and I did a lot of support. We used to use the Kinkos as the place to make Move and Mumia flyers. So Mumia went from like fourth, fifth generation leaflets with all capital letters, and you could hardly read it. And his face looked like a thumbprint with a smile. To change that into perfectly, beautifully designed, endless quantities of flyers, just because I was handing them whatever they wanted. Like, you need anything? And they'd say, sure, flyers, blah, 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 blah. And I would just come back with 10 cases of the shit and cards with credit on it that you could make copies. But anyway, I was just one of a million supporters. But when I said to my friend Beth, "Oh, I know them. They live down the street," and she says, "Who is this?" And I said, "Well, the police dropped a bomb on the house, and la 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 la. People burned up." She's Googling as I'm talking, and she's flipping out. She's going, "What the fuck is this? Like, this is insane." So she starts, and with my assistance and with me introducing her to Move People, she starts a project. That is, it turns into a podcast project. It's called Murder at Ryan's Run. The why I'm telling you this is because critical thinking means that when someone who's a new set of eyes, fresh eyes, comes into a subject and asks you a question, she says, "What happened with John Gilbride? And what happened with this? And what happened with that? And how is this proven? And why do you believe this part?" I had to say what I had to say. I had to say, as a supporter, blah, blah, blah. I had to defend what I had been telling other people for decades. And when that fell apart because of that annoying thing called critical thinking, it turns into we have exposed the cult of John Africa like nobody else in 50 years of history has ever come near doing. And it's Beth McNamara, it's her work. I'm assisting as the archival researcher and the factotum. But it also exposes Mumia Abu Jamal. And I used to tell visitors from other countries, do you know about the Mumia case? Do you know about the Move bombing? I would drive them over to the house, to the place where it happened, and show them the location. So it turns into, for the past 6 years, this project has taken up a huge amount of my time and has dominated my way of explaining anarchism. It's not just the Catholic Church that's the mother of all cults. It's there's new cults. Oh, and by the way, when I lived in Paris for a couple of years, uh, I had a job as a researcher for a television company that also made like TV movies, and we did a project about the Jonestown disaster of 1978 in Guyana. So I became very aware of cults because of that project, and I became acquainted with people who had actually been there in the pavilion with Jim Jones and in his church. So I knew going into the move question, I wasn't a new I wasn't a total novice on the subject. And so, and there's something I forgot to mention. When I was 18, I joined the Navy. And I was in there until I basically got out on a general discharge with benefits. And I meant to mention it, but I kept getting distracted into other subjects. So I have veterans benefits at the Veterans Hospital now, but I never saw war. I never saw combat. I just was in a hospital compound as a hospital corpsman in Virginia. So my experience with anarchism, uh, it's sort of like hardwired and built into my experience as a researcher, as a historical researcher, and I call the Voltairine de Cleyre and the people I've recovered from total oblivion. I've done that with a good number of people. Uh, Voltairine was already known. Chaim Weinberg was mostly forgot, almost totally forgotten. There were others that I discovered that literally no living person was aware of them, and they had very long, interesting lives. I call them my dead anarchists. And what's amazing is that there were all different kinds of anarchists, just as there are now. Like there were rich. There were a couple of guys in Philly. They were one was Cooper, his last name was, uh, and he was filthy rich. There was a rich family called the Earls who they were very rich, old family from old New England, colonial family with tons of money. They're still rich, and they had a couple of really active anarchists in their family, and so all these people were totally unknown. And I love getting lost in these stories because when the certain thing happens, when you discover it, you yourself are the only person on earth who knows this story. And it's a cool story. And you found it. And that's like, it's like the world comes alive inside your head. Another thing, people were fooled by hucksters in the old days. Like um, Voltairine de Cleyre was a big fan and a supporter of a guy named Honore Jackson, Jaxon. He was, it turns out, uh, thanks to fairly recent scholarship, he was a pretendian. He was this from Western Canada, the real uprising and all that was his story, his backstory. But he was full of shit. But Voltairine didn't see this. She was jumping on the bandwagon and she was promoting him and invited him to do a talk in Philly. So there was these parallels between the past and the present that I was always seeing. And I used to give walking tours in certain neighborhoods where there were a lot of historical events. I called it the anarchist historical walking tour. And I gave that, I must have given that 40 or 50 times probably. And they were great. And I was always trying to tell people that the bunch of anarchists that are in Philly now is just like the bunch of anarchists that were here 120 years ago. It hasn't changed that much. And you know what's I think a very close identical match is the French anarchist Ravachol and Luigi Mangione. I'll just say that as a funny tidbit, but they have a lot in common, those two guys. Um, but I don't think Mangione was aware that Ravachol had ever lived or didn't ever existed. But they're pretty close. Like I said, critical thinking, mutual aid, and kindness. That'll get the anarchist through life in a respectable way, in a way that one can feel good about when you're getting old. When you're, I'm looking at poverty, old age, infirmity, thinking about whether I want to go into a nursing home someday, like 10, 20 years from now. Do I want to go into a nursing home and just disintegrate or kill myself or what? Like there's all sorts of questions that come up. And I'd like to feel good about the anarchism. And this is how I explain it. And I feel that it's a worthwhile way to I got married to it a long time ago, and I've been an anarchist since 1989. So uh, if I couldn't feel good about it, I would just dump it. But I do feel good about it. But that's only when you accept my way of explaining what it is, because what I'm saying it is, that's what I'm advocating.